I couldn't connect with that movie because the visuals didn't speak to me at all. I was amused at times, and therefore you probably heard me chuckle from time to time listening to the dialogue between various people speaking on air, and it reminded me of these unmoderated discussions that sometimes happen on the internet. But I was impressed that these people were acting in earnest. They thought that they were trying to help out the situation, whether or not they were trained to do so. And we just can't imagine that kind of a situation here in Canada because we grew up with institutions that take care of law and order on the streets, however you want to call that. Here were individuals who did not trust the police to do so. I think that's what I took from it, and took it upon themselves to take control over the streets and put up these checkpoints. It's quite encouraging to know that there now is a new police force. So whatever we think about what happened then in February of 2014, that seems to be history now, and now that it does not reflect the situation today. Those were very tumultuous times, and I think the movie conveyed a snapshot of that tumultuous existence that people were trying to grapple with the chaos that was going on, and with the lack of trust in the law enforcement agencies. As far as the second movie is concerned, it was interesting to listen to these three, were the young movie makers, young movie directors. I thought it was curious them trying to make a movie out of their own conversation, and I was more amused by the pregnant pauses that were taking place and how they were trying to fill in those pregnant pauses. That's all I took away from the second movie.
As to the visual part of the first movie, this film director is also a photographer. He has about 7,000 pictures of Lviv, of this city, and also very short films, very short documented pieces. He did it specifically, it's his artistic manner, not to show the city in motion as much as possible, but to show his personal vision of the city as he remembers it, being far from it, because he lives in Berlin now. So he put together most of his pictures that he did during the last years, if that helps. And also added the soundtrack of this channel accessible for any public.
I think we have yeah, I'm in agreement with the last gentleman said. Really interesting to see how these people were able to come off the place. The only thing that really struck me was how it really seemed to represent like an internet discussion where there needs to be moderation, and when moderation does come into place, it seems like there's a great deal of censorship going on.
Yeah, as we said at the beginning...
Maybe we'll get a few other people to speak. Of course, you got something to say.
Well, yeah. Well, I think points that Nicole and the gentleman made clear about the first film are all equally valid. I mean, I agree with all of them, and I think together we have a scene that's fascinating for me, is that this was unadulterated, on-the-ground, frontline footage of the conflict at the time, and the challenge of, citizens trying to take control of their lives and protect their society and protect the new events, and not really having the wherewithal how to do it. And it's frustrating and sad to see because they all had the same cause, but are approaching from different ways. And it reminded me of I think in some ways that the whole Euromaidan thing reminded me of the old traditional Slavonic stichine vestania that used to happen all through Tsarist time, these spontaneous rebellions that unfortunately most of them didn't last very long because they weren't organized or disciplined. Not so at least here, but this is the challenge of any such thing. And that the film, I think, really underlined that very well. And you could just see the creative tension in these groups. There was one guy who said, he says, I just want to talk to him. Well, we know you don't want to just talk to him. You know time you want to punch his lights out. You have this tension and the plea for rationality. So it's a very, very fascinating thing to see. And thank God there were no press correspondents filtering this thing out, which we've had quite a bit. The other thing, the second film I found fascinating, and Professor Timothy Snyder reminded us in a recent TV Agenda interview of the bilingualism of Ukraine, which had been clear from the outset. But Western correspondents missed the whole point. I mean, it was fed to the teeth all throughout the Maidan days of the so-called conflict, civil war of the Ukrainian-speaking West versus the Russian-speaking East. It's all nonsense, and Snyder says people know what they're talking about, but it's a convenient, easy media line to maintain. And here we have 3 people speaking Russian throughout about their Ukrainian identity. I'm sure half the diaspora is vomiting at this, but this is the reality. This is the reality that's always been in Ukraine, right? And in fact, if you looked at all the radio or TV broadcasts of Maidan, you heard more Russian than Ukrainian on the streets of Kyiv. And that's the reality, folks, right? So it is fascinating stuff. Thank you very much for bringing it.
The first movie I thought was shown very well, the Desperate Times Call for Desperate Measures. And the other thing that I want to say is that actually the absence of action on the screen was actually quite good, because it made you focus on what was being said. And although I have to say I was quite irritated by the length of the discussion of this card with the drunk or maybe not drunk person. Okay. It took way too long, because I thought, well, okay, we got the point. But it actually illustrated how difficult it is to judge what's important, what's not important, when you really don't have much of a reach and ability to control a relatively large city and many different situations involving, and people not knowing what's important and what's not, and somebody not able to really triage it well. The second movie I found quite fascinating. I understand some Russian, so it was interesting to follow the subtitles and seeing that some of the translations were actually relatively funny, but not intended funny. But on the other hand, I was really struck with the sincerity in some ways of people speaking and representing different, I guess, sentiments towards the evolving situation. People that were not emotionally involved or trying to run away from it, people that were trying to convince themselves that they're interested, and people that were really invested. And it was interesting, it was all done in Russian, which just tells you that there's solitudes and they're all striving for the same things.
Thank you. Someone else. What about it? I'm going to make an old guy run up the stairs.
Thank you. For me, both films was really interesting. I believe that the first film doesn't really need to have anything on the screen. You could just actually listen to that. But also for me, since I've been to Lviv a couple of times, I knew that there were like actually these streets, so you could recognize something, and it's, for me, still makes sense. But I was more impressed by the second film, and for me, the main topic which touched me is that actually, like, looking on my own from Canada is like seeing the story, you know, as they said, it's history. It's something going on, big event, you know, change. But I'm not sure, but I feel like I'm the only person in the room who actually lived through it myself, being in Kyiv, being on the streets, being like in this center of what's going on, and it's my personal story. It's the same as for the people on the screen who are talking about it. It's actually not how it was screened or like showed in the TV. It's your personal feelings, about your personal like relatives, about your dad, about your loved ones, and it's how it's happening in your life and in your heart. You have your own reflections, and it's very, very connected. And it's like not like you woke up one day and everything is changed. It's the process of reflection of what's going on in your country and in your life. So for me, it was like this first part when they were talking, it was really important for showing Canadians that it's not just a history, it's like a million personal stories which gather together. That's my reflection. Thank you.
Regarding that first film, I lived through a similar situation here in Canada. During the ice storm, I was have an amateur radio license, and in Kempfeld, south of Ottawa, all the communications went down. So all the amateur radio people went down to the town and helped fill in the vacuum. The telephones didn't work, cell towers didn't work. So we were coordinating information between the fire station, the hospital, the agricultural college, stuff like that. And I can tell you that in a situation like that, you do kind of make up some rules as you go. However, in that situation, we were working with the police and the army and whatever, the fire department. In Lviv, I'm kind of curious, were those people actually part of a radio club before this event happened? Okay.
Yeah, before we get anybody else?
I'll just get some questions.
Sure.
Yeah, for me it was really interesting watching the first one because I don't really know much about the situation there, but to see people doing the best that they can to work together and keeping each other in check. When someone's emotions was getting the best of them, they were saying, no, this isn't the purpose. We're here and we're trying to do the best we can. So I thought they were working really well together, and I think it raised a lot more questions for me than answers. As far as the imagery goes, it was interesting that the guy, at the very end, it was shown that it was shot on VHS. And I don't know if there was a reason for that or if that was his only available technology. But it kind of almost went with the tone of the film and some of the emptiness of the shots and buildings and vehicles. As far as the second film goes, it was interesting seeing people at such a young age talking so much about the national identity and who they were, and almost questioning whether that's it's important to be nationalistic and that sort of thing. It's not something that many people I know growing up in Canada would talk about, but I can only assume that the circumstances would have forced that conversation.
Yeah. Well, to build up on what Nicola's comments about how people, their conscious ideas, their development of ideas because of the environment they grow up in. And of course, I make a comment based on my built-up consciousness of psychology from the environment I grew up in. So anyway, the comment would be regarding the second film. It seems there's a development of a sort of a feeling for what it is to be Ukrainian, but there's this fear that they are nationalist. And the word nationalist maybe to them means something a little bit different. It has a sort of a negative meaning. So I see them kind of fighting with that. They have these feelings, but they don't want to be a nationalist. So I don't know if that's it's just something I noticed. Oh yeah, do you know what a double-dyed nationalist is?
What is that? Double-dyed?
As I understand in English, died twice.
Oh, we would say dyed in the wool. Yeah, a dyed in the wool nationalist. Dr. Sulin. Okay, a couple of things on the films. I tend to agree with most of you. When you look at the first one, all of a sudden, in a city the size of Ottawa, all the police disappeared. A couple of thousand weapons theoretically had been stolen from the police station. And some guy gets there, sets up a base station, gets other people on the air, and starts them patrolling. And everybody starts doing this sort of stuff. And it's kind of amazing to think that in a large city like that, people will start taking responsibility for patrolling and taking care of their neighborhoods. And it's also done on a basis of fear, because those 8 gays are up there somewhere. They're talking about them, they're afraid of them. They're afraid of what might come into the city, because they're really worried about putting up blog posts around the perimeter of the city. So there's real fear, and there's also real potential for misuse of power. That one guy just wants to grab somebody, take their money away from them, and send it to the Maidan. I mean, that's going way overboard, especially when we talk about the kind, same sort of thing. But it's really interesting is that whole tension that's there between the people trying to keep things under control, trying to somehow save the city, keep it in order, other people joining that whole network, and then going overboard. And you heard about them banning, but it's actually cutting people off the network because they misbehave, because they don't know how to get on the air, they don't know what to talk about. Very interesting. I think a lot of things Costa talked about. The second film, I mean, the last 2/3 of it were sort of artistic in quotation marks, but the first third of it was really interesting because I sort of saw it a bit differently. The 3 of them, those are the cool kids in a high school, because they're at the film festival all day. They're smoking up. They see the director, their friend, walking around in a fur coat with a parrot on his shoulder, with with a pair of twins, walking behind them with poodles and a couple of black guys carrying his film. They're into all this sort of cool and neat stuff. And then the Maidan happens. And they have to sort of face reality. The girl there is not that interested in facing reality. During the Maidan, she dealt with her boyfriend problem. One of the guys really started talking about identity and what it was and what it wasn't to be Ukrainian. The third one seemed to be more interested in the Maidan and its eventual effects and whether they should or should not be Ukrainian, whether they should stay there and work in the country. So it was a really neat sort of, I mean, there were 1 million, 500,000 people on the Maidan, but this is really the other people around them. The people who were sort of watching it, maybe psychologically involved, but not physically involved. Really neat sort of film and worthwhile watching.